I didn't realize my husband was stealing my empire until the day he stood in front of a judge and asked for half of everything my father had died to build. The October sunlight streamed through the courthouse windows, catching dust motes that danced like tiny witnesses to betrayal. The air smelled of old paper and bitter coffee, and the murmur of journalists and lawyers created a soundtrack of anticipation. I sat perfectly still in the front row, my fingers wrapped around a cream-colored envelope, while Julian Thorne, my husband of 3 years, performed the final act of his carefully scripted con. He walked into that Boston courtroom like he owned it. The bespoke navy suit fit him perfectly, every line tailored to project confidence and success. His smile was the same one that had charmed me at a financial conference 3 years ago, the one I'd mistaken for love. Now I recognized it for what it truly was, the satisfied smirk of a predator closing in for the kill. "Your Honor," Julian began, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, "I believe I'm entirely entitled to a comfortable life from my wife's assets. I've sacrificed my own career to support her." The cameras flashed like lightning. Reporters scribbled frantically. He glanced at me with those gray eyes that once made my heart race, now cold with triumph. "For years, I've been the foundation she's built upon. I only ask for what's fair." Judge Hayes, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, looked at me. "Mrs. Vance, would you like to respond?" I shook my head, slowly, deliberately. "Not yet, Your Honor." The envelope in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Inside it was the truth, colder and sharper than any love I'd ever known. Julian continued his performance, each word a carefully placed stone in the monument to his own greed. He spoke of sacrifices and contributions, of late nights and unwavering support. Every sentence was a knife twisting in the memory of what I'd thought we had. I listened, counting each small lie, knowing that these very words would be the rope he'd hang himself with. 3 years earlier, I had met Julian at the Boston Harbor Hotel during a financial summit. My father had died 6 months before, leaving me Vance Holdings and a legacy of disputes I wasn't prepared to handle. I was drowning in legal paperwork, fighting off distant relatives who suddenly remembered they loved my father, and trying to prove I could run a company I'd inherited at 28. Julian appeared like an answer to prayers I hadn't known I was praying. He was calm where I was frantic, confident where I doubted, knowledgeable about every aspect of corporate law and finance. He knew things about Vance Holdings that I'd barely discovered myself. "You're not just inheriting a company," he'd told me over champagne that first night. "You're building your own empire. That takes vision." I thought he saw me. I thought he understood. 3 months later, Julian arrived at my office with a legal consulting contract. "To protect the company," he said, spreading documents across my father's old desk. He pointed out vulnerabilities, cited obscure regulations, referenced conversations we'd had in the quiet darkness of my bedroom. Private fears I'd whispered to him about hostile takeovers and shareholder revolts. "This will shield you," he promised. I signed because I trusted him. I signed because I was exhausted. I signed because I believed he was my ally. The wedding was small, elegant, at a chapel overlooking the Charles River. My father's old business partner, Harold Quinn, gave me away with a sadness in his eyes I didn't understand then. "Your father would want you to be careful, Bernardine," he'd whispered. "Not everyone who offers help has your best interests at heart." I'd smiled, thinking he was just being protective. I wish I'd listened. 2 weeks after the wedding, a letter arrived from my bank confirming that 22% of Vance Holdings had been transferred to Gray Line Ventures. I stared at the document, my hands shaking. I had never signed such a transfer. I would remember signing away nearly a quarter of my father's legacy. When I confronted Julian that evening, he laughed, actually laughed, and patted my hand like I was a confused child. "You forgot already, sweetheart? We discussed this. It's all in the partnership agreement you signed." That night I couldn't sleep. I went to my home office at 3 a.m. and pulled every document Julian had ever given me. The signature was perfect, identical to mine in every way. But something felt wrong. I forwarded everything to a legal expert I'd known from college, someone outside Julian's circle. Her response came 48 hours later. The metadata shows this document was created 2 weeks after the date on the contract. The signature is scanned, not original. Someone uploaded it after the fact. My world tilted on its axis. Julian hadn't been protecting my legacy. He'd been rewriting it. That night, I locked myself in my office and copied every file, every email, every document onto a USB drive. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized, someone who'd been so desperate for partnership that she'd handed over the keys to her kingdom. I couldn't go to the police with suspicions. I needed proof, the kind that would stand up in court. So I called Mac Riley, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who'd done security work for my father. Look into Gray Line Ventures, I told him. Be discreet, be thorough, find everything. 3 days later, Mac walked into my office with a file folder and eyes as cold as a January morning. Gray Line Ventures has no employees, no payroll, no tax activity. Just transfers. Your money. He spread bank statements across my desk. $2.7 million across 4 accounts, all of them connected to Julian Thorne. Then he handed me an email recovered from a server Julian thought he'd scrubbed clean. Prepare the sale terms once I control majority shares. Everything crystallized in that moment. Julian wasn't managing my assets. He was maneuvering to take them. Every conversation, every gentle suggestion, every document he'd slid across the table had been part of a plan to steal what my father had built. I copied everything Mac brought me onto a second USB drive and looked at myself in the mirror again. This time, I saw someone different. Someone stronger. Someone who wouldn't go down without a fight. But I needed to understand who I was really dealing with. The 10th anniversary gala for Vance Holdings was approaching, an event Julian had insisted we host at the Fairmont Copley Plaza. We need to show we're a team, he'd said. Partners, in every sense. I agreed, even as my stomach churned with the knowledge of his betrayal. The night of the gala, the ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and the cream of Boston society. Julian raised his glass for a toast, his voice carrying across the room. To my wonderful wife, and to us, the soon-to-be co-owners of Vance Holdings. The applause was thunderous, glasses clinked, and I smiled until my face ached. But Harold Quinn, my father's old advisor, pulled me aside during the cocktail hour. Are you sure you know everything about Julian? He asked, his weathered face grave. I represented his ex-wife 10 years ago. She lost everything. He forged her consent on a trust fund transfer. The champagne in my glass suddenly tasted like ash. What was her name? I whispered. Harold's expression was pitiful. Does it matter? He's done this before, Bernadine, and he'll do it again. That night, I went to the state archives. Public records don't lie. I found Julian Thorne's name under a headline from 2013. Real estate attorney's widow accuses husband of fraudulent transfer. The same face stared back at me from a grainy photo. The same confident smile. He'd done this before. He'd destroyed someone else's life, taken everything she had, and walked away clean. And now he was doing it to me. I couldn't let him win. Not again. Not when I had the resources my father had left me. Not when I had proof of what he'd done. I reached out to FBI agent Elias Chen, someone Mac had recommended. I need to talk to you about fraud, I said. Sophisticated fraud that's been going on for years. The federal building downtown was imposing, all concrete and glass, and the weight of justice. Agent Chen was a slight man with sharp eyes and an economy of movement that spoke of intense focus. I handed him the thick envelope Mac and I had compiled. This is Gray Line Ventures, I said. This is how my husband has been stealing from me. Chen examined the forged partnership contract, holding it up to the light. The metadata shows this was created 6 months ago, edited 3 weeks ago. Not in 2021, like the signature claims. Can we use this? I leaned forward. That's what I need you to tell me. He tapped the document thoughtfully. Not yet. He has to use it in court himself. When he does, it becomes intent to defraud. That's when we can move. The trap was set, but it required patience. It required me to appear weak, to let Julian think he was winning. Days later, Chen called me. He's filed preliminary divorce papers citing irreconcilable differences. He's confident. He mentioned a prenuptial agreement that you allegedly never signed. I closed my eyes. He's going to present the forgery to the judge. Chen's voice was grim. Yes. And when he does, we'll have him. But I needed more. I needed the smoking gun that would make this case airtight. I went to my father's old office at Vance Holdings, the one I'd kept locked and untouched since his death. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, and in the bottom drawer of his personal safe, I found a velvet-wrapped USB drive. A note in my father's handwriting was attached. Backup agreement, not to be altered. My hands shook as I connected the drive to my computer. Folders appeared, pristine and organized. Partnership agreements from 2019 to 2022, untouched, complete with full metadata. And in the edit history of the partnership PDF was a line that made my blood run cold. Edited by Charles Ells Legal. Edit date, February 3, 2023. I sent an encrypted copy to Agent Chen. That night he called me, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. We've got him. The signature log contains a unique hash code from software that didn't exist until 2023. It's forensic gold, Bernardine. Then he added, You need to let him think you're unprepared. Let him feel safe, confident. That's when people make mistakes. So I played my part. I acted defeated in our few interactions. I placed a new envelope in my desk drawer, this one containing the forensic report, pages of metadata analysis, and authorization from the FBI. On the envelope I wrote, Clear and solid for Judge Hayes, to be opened at the right moment. The Monday morning of the hearing arrived with gray skies and light rain. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of expensive perfume mixed with nervous sweat. I sat in the front row, the cream envelope resting on my lap. Julian entered like a conquering hero, his charcoal suit impeccable, his red silk tie a slash of arrogance. He smiled at the cameras as if this were his coronation. His lawyer stood, a polished woman in her 50s with a voice like smooth bourbon. Your Honor, my client has been a devoted husband and advisor. We will present evidence that Mrs. Vance never signed a prenuptial agreement. Therefore, all marital assets should be divided equally. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters leaned forward. This was the moment they'd been waiting for. Then Julian stood. He cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. For years, I've supported my wife as she ran the company her late father left her. She inherited everything. The house, the assets, the legacy. I'm the one who brought her balance, credibility, partnership. I only ask to live comfortably from what we built together. He turned to me, his eyes glinting with challenge. Bernardine, you owe me that much, don't you? I didn't blink. I'd seen Mac Riley in the back row giving me a slight nod. It was time. I stood slowly, every eye in the room tracking my movement. Your Honor, may I approach the bench? Judge Hayes studied me for a long moment, then nodded. Proceed. I walked forward with measured steps, placing my envelope next to Julian's stack of documents. I'd like the court to verify the date and the ink composition used on Mr. Thorne's documents. A ripple of surprise ran through the room. Judge Hayes raised an eyebrow. Continue. The digital pen used for his signature was released in 2023, I said calmly, my voice steady despite my racing heart. The contract he's presenting is dated 2021. The silence that followed was absolute, suffocating, hanging in the air like a held breath. Judge Hayes turned to the forensic report I'd provided, stamped with FBI authorization. She read for what felt like an eternity, her lips pressed into a thin line, and then, unexpectedly, she laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh, but one of pure disbelief at the audacity. Mr. Thorne, she said, still smiling slightly. You're asking this court to believe you signed a document 2 years before the pen you used was even manufactured? The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. Julian's lawyer looked like she'd been struck. Julian's face drained of color. He gripped the table, his knuckles white. That can't be. She forged it. She set me up. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound hollow and desperate. 2 security officers moved toward him. He looked at me with pure hatred, and I met his gaze with calm certainty. I leaned in slightly, my voice just loud enough for him to hear over the chaos. I told you, Julian, silence can be very powerful. His hands trembled. Everything he'd built, all his careful planning, was collapsing around him. Agent Chen appeared from the side door, federal badge in hand, and 2 more agents flanked him. Judge Hayes's gavel came down 3 times, sharp and final. All claims to marital property from Mr. Thorne are denied. Mrs. Vance retains full ownership of Vance Holdings, and this court will award damages for legal and emotional distress. Another strike of the gavel. Julian was led away, not struggling, just staring at the floor, as if he couldn't comprehend how it had all gone so wrong. Chen made his way through the crowd to hand me a folded paper with a federal seal. The FBI will be charging him with forgery, fraud, and attempted asset theft. He's done. I nodded, feeling strangely empty. Will they find the others? Chen's expression darkened. We already have. 2 prior cases, same pattern, different women. He'll face federal prison time. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Mrs. Vance, how does it feel to win? I looked directly into the nearest camera. It's not about winning, I said. It's about correcting a wrong that never should have happened. I turned away from the chaos, from the shouting and the questions, and walked toward where my lawyer, Camille Dubois, waited, under the stone archway, smiling. You did it, she said. I shook my head. No. The truth did it. 6 months later, I stood in my new office at the Vance Foundation for Financial Truth, an organization I'd founded to help others like me, like Julian's previous victims, like all the people who'd been manipulated and betrayed by those they trusted. The space smelled of fresh paint and possibility, and through the windows, I could see the Boston Public Garden, trees beginning to bud with spring growth. A single envelope sat on my desk, Julian's neat handwriting on the front. It had been forwarded from the prison where he was serving his sentence. I opened it slowly, not sure what to expect. Bernardine, I only wanted to live off your wealth. I smiled, not with malice, but with pity. At least once, he told the truth. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer next to the wedding ring I'd removed months ago. And now, I said quietly to the empty room, he's living on my taxes. The church bells downtown chimed the hour. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating an old photograph on my desk of my father and me at the Vance Holdings groundbreaking. He told me once, wealth comes with responsibility. Back then, I thought he meant money. Now I understood he meant truth. My laptop, Maine. Husband transferred farm property to his name before filing for divorce. I nodded, feeling purpose settle into my bones. All right, I murmured, opening the folder. Let's start with her case. I placed my hand on the old cream envelope, the one I'd carried into court that day, now kept as a reminder. Justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with applause or revenge. It simply waits for the right moment to be seen. And sometimes, it comes in the shape of a small envelope, silent, humble, and bright enough to outshine everything that ever tried to bury it. The foundation grew quickly. Within a year, we'd helped 18 women and 3 men recover assets stolen through forgery, manipulation, and abuse of trust. Each case was different, but the pattern was always the same. Someone in power, someone trusted, exploiting that trust for personal gain, And each time, we found the truth. We documented it. We presented it to the courts, and we won. Harold Quinn visited me one afternoon, his old eyes bright with something that looked like pride. "Your father would be proud," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Not just of what you've built, but of who you've become." I thought about that for a moment. "I didn't become someone new," I finally said. "I just remembered who I was before I let someone else define me." Mac Riley still did occasional work for the foundation, tracking down hidden assets and uncovering fraud. "You know," he told me during one of our meetings, "Julian wasn't even the worst I've seen. But he might have been the most arrogant. He really thought he could steal an empire and get away with it." I laughed, a real laugh that felt good in my chest. The arrogance is what caught him. If he'd been content with less, he might have succeeded. But Julian had wanted it all. He'd wanted the company, the house, the accounts, the legacy. He'd wanted to erase my father's memory and replace it with his own name. And in wanting everything, he'd lost it all. The federal charges had been severe. 10 years for fraud, 5 for forgery, 3 for attempted theft, all running consecutively. He'd be an old man when he got out. I received occasional letters from him, always the same tone of injured innocence mixed with veiled threats. "You destroyed my life," one read. "I loved you, and you chose money over us." I never responded. There was nothing to say. He hadn't loved me. He'd loved what I represented. And I hadn't chosen money over love. I'd chosen truth over lies. The foundation became my life's work, more meaningful than Vance Holdings had ever been. I still ran the company, but now it felt like a means to an end rather than an end in itself. The profits funded the foundation. The resources helped people who had nowhere else to turn. And every person we helped, every case we won, felt like another small victory over the Julian thorns of the world. One evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, my assistant brought in a package. "This just arrived, marked urgent." I opened it to find a thick file from Agent Chen. A note on top read, "Thought you'd want to see this. Julian's first victim, from 2009. Her name was Rebecca Marsh. She's been trying to rebuild for 15 years. I read through the file, my heart breaking with each page. Rebecca had been a successful architect when she met Julian. He'd been younger then, less polished. But the pattern was identical. He'd isolated her from friends and family, gained control of her finances, then systematically emptied her accounts and transferred her property rights. By the time she realized what was happening, he'd disappeared with everything she had. She'd tried to press charges, but without concrete proof, the case went nowhere. She'd lost her firm, her house, her savings, everything. And Julian had moved on to his next target, refining his technique with each victim. I picked up the phone and called Chen. "I want to help her, Rebecca Marsh. Can you get me in touch?" There was a pause. "She might not want to relive it, Bernadine." I understood that fear. "Just ask her. Tell her I want to help, no strings attached." 2 weeks later, Rebecca Marsh sat in my office, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much pain. We didn't talk about Julian at first. We talked about architecture, about Boston, about the strange paths life takes us on. Then, gently, I told her what had happened to me. "He did the same thing to you," she said, not a question but a statement. "Yes," I replied. "But I had resources you didn't have. I had my father's legacy backing me. And now I want to use those resources to help you." We worked with lawyers for 6 months, digging through old records, finding proof that had been overlooked or dismissed 15 years ago. And we found it. Buried in archived server data, email trails that Julian had thought were deleted, bank transfers that showed the same pattern I'd uncovered in my own case. We reopened Rebecca's case, and this time, with federal attention already on Julian, the prosecutors listened. The day Rebecca was awarded restitution from Julian's seized assets was one of the best days of my life. She cried, Not from sadness, but from relief. From the validation that she'd been telling the truth all along. That she wasn't crazy or vindictive or greedy. She'd been a victim, and now she was a survivor. "You gave me my life back," she told me, gripping my hands. I shook my head. "No, the truth gave you your life back. I just helped it come to light." As the foundation grew, so did I. I started dating again, cautiously at first, carrying the wounds Julian had left. But I learned to trust my instincts, to see red flags I'd missed before, to value honesty over charm. I met Daniel, a professor of ethics at Boston University, at a charity event. He was quiet, thoughtful, nothing like Julian's polished persona. Our first conversation was about Aristotle's concept of virtue, and I found myself genuinely engaged, not performing or pretending. "What do you do?" he asked. I told him about the foundation, about helping victims of financial fraud and abuse. His eyes lit up with genuine interest. "That's remarkable. Using privilege to protect others." I liked that he called it privilege, not wealth or power. It showed he understood. We took things slowly, building trust brick by brick. He met me where I was, never pushing, never demanding more than I could give. 1 year after the trial, I hosted a gala for the foundation at the same Fairmont Copley Plaza where Julian had made his toast about co-owning Vance Holdings. This time, the ballroom was filled with survivors, supporters, and legal experts dedicated to stopping fraud. I stood at the podium, looking out at faces that held hope instead of hidden agendas. "A year ago," I began, "I learned that the person I trusted most was stealing everything I valued. But in losing that trust, I found something more valuable. The truth about who I am and what I'm capable of. This foundation exists because betrayal doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something better." The applause was warm and real, and I felt my father's presence in that moment, as if he were standing beside me, proud of what I'd built from the ashes of what was almost destroyed. The foundation continued to grow, expanding beyond Massachusetts to other states, helping more people, uncovering more fraud. We partnered with federal agencies, trained lawyers in financial forensics, created resources for victims who didn't know where to turn. Each case was different, but the core mission remained the same: bring truth to light, no matter how deeply it's buried. Julian's letters eventually stopped coming. I heard through Agent Chen that he'd been moved to a different facility, that he'd become a model prisoner, attending classes and staying out of trouble. "People like him often are," Chen said. "Prison is just another system to game, another situation to manipulate." I didn't care what Julian did anymore. He was part of my past, a chapter closed and filed away. What mattered was the present, the work we were doing, the lives we were changing. Claire Morton from Maine got her farm back. A man in Texas recovered a business his partner had stolen through forged contracts. A woman in California reclaimed her inheritance that her stepchildren had diverted. Each victory was small in the grand scheme of things, but for the people involved, it meant everything. I kept the cream envelope in my office, mounted in a frame on the wall. Visitors sometimes asked about it. "That's where I kept the truth," I'd tell them, before it was time to share it. It served as a reminder that justice isn't always immediate, that sometimes you have to wait for the right moment, gather your evidence, and trust that truth, however long it takes to emerge, will ultimately prevail. 5 years after the trial, I stood in the same courtroom where Julian had tried to take everything from me. This time, I was there as an expert witness in another fraud case, helping prosecutors understand the tactics of financial manipulation. Judge Hayes, now semi-retired, was presiding. After the hearing, she called me to her chambers. "You've done good work, Bernadine," she said, pouring tea into delicate china cups. "Your father would be proud." I thought about that, about legacy and pride and what it means to honor someone's memory. "I think he'd be proud that I learned from my mistakes," I replied, "that I turned pain into purpose." She nodded, her wise eyes seeing more than I'd said. "The best revenge is living well. You've done that and then some." I thought about Julian sometimes, wondered if he'd ever understood what he'd really lost, Not the money or the company, but the chance for something real. He'd been so focused on the performance of love, on the transaction of marriage, that he'd never considered the possibility of genuine connection. He'd played a role so long he'd forgotten there was anything else. But I'd learned the opposite lesson. I'd learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, that trust must be earned, that love built on lies isn't love at all. I'd learned that wealth isn't just money in accounts but richness of purpose, depth of relationships, and the strength that comes from knowing who you are when everything else is stripped away. The Foundation's 5th anniversary gala was the biggest yet. Rebecca Marsh was there, having rebuilt her architecture firm and now serving on our board. Daniel was beside me, solid and real, a partner in every true sense of the word. Mac Riley worked the room, still keeping an eye out for trouble even at a celebration. And Agent Chen came with news. Julian had been denied parole, would serve his full sentence. As I looked around the ballroom, at all the people we'd helped, at all the lives that had been reclaimed and rebuilt, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Complete peace. Not because Julian was in prison, though there was justice in that. Not because I'd won, though I had. But because I'd discovered that the real victory wasn't in defeating him. It was in becoming someone he could never touch again. Someone who knew her worth and wouldn't let anyone diminish it. The cream envelope on my office wall had become something of a symbol for the Foundation. We gave small replicas to every client we helped, a reminder that truth, however carefully documented and patiently held, will always find its moment. Inside each envelope was a card with a simple message. Your truth matters. Your story matters. You matter. Late one night, working alone in the office, I pulled out the original envelope from its frame. Inside was the forensic report that had ended Julian's scheme, but also something else I'd placed there years ago. A letter I'd written to myself the night I discovered what he'd done. You are not what he tried to make you, it read. You are not his victim, his mark, his fool. You are Bernadine Vance, and you will survive this. More than survive. You will thrive. I had thrived, not in spite of what Julian had done, but through the process of confronting it, fighting back, and building something meaningful from the wreckage. The Foundation had helped hundreds of people now, and each one carried a piece of that original truth, that we are not defined by what others do to us, but by how we respond. As I locked up the office that night, I looked out at the Boston skyline, lights twinkling against the dark sky. Somewhere in a federal prison, Julian was probably sleeping, dreaming whatever dreams a man like him dreams. But I was here, free, purposeful, surrounded by people I trusted and work that mattered. I'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to me and transformed it into the best thing I'd ever done. The cream envelope went back into its frame, a silent testament to the power of patience, proof, and truth. And as I turned off the lights and headed home, I thought about my father's words one more time. Wealth comes with responsibility. I finally understood. The responsibility wasn't to protect wealth, but to use it wisely, to help others, to stand for truth, to ensure that what had happened to me, to Rebecca, to all of Julian's victims, happened to fewer people in the future. Justice had been served, not with a gavel strike alone, but with every person we helped, every truth we uncovered, every life we helped rebuild. And that, I realized as I stepped out into the cool Boston night, was the sweetest revenge of all. Taking something meant to destroy me, and using it to build something that would outlast us all.